Hi everyone, welcome back. It's Reese, and this is Reese Gray Analyzes, and I'm so excited that you guys decided to adventure with me today. On Reese Gray Analyzes, we look at creations and experiences in art, media, music, and even video games to explore exactly why we think the way we think, question what we believe, and learn something new. And we're finally getting into something a little bit more substantial today. We're going to delve into two books here that deal with PTSD responses. And we're going to talk about the concept of learned helplessness today. Yay! So I know that's really like mood whiplash from like my last videos on like Sriracha, the nail industry, and like Martha Stewart. But you know what? Let's get into it because boo, we hate not being unserious. Boo. So let's be serious. So Body Keeps the Score is by Besser van der Kolk. And then Talking to Strangers is by Malcolm Gladwell. And let's get this out of the way right away, all right? People don't like Malcolm Gladwell because they think that he takes like abstracts and then takes like incorrect conclusions of them and doesn't really honor academia and like he's a fake academic and stuff. So the only thing that we're going to be talking about today, SERE program, SERE, on that program today, which you can look up for yourself if you're concerned with the validity of the study or anything, which I think is super fair, and we should always like be open to like critique and wary of the things that, you know, we study and stuff, and like look for a bunch of different options. So I just wanted to bring that up right away so you guys don't think I'm some kind of shill. But I do think the study is really interesting, and I think reading up on like PTSD responses and learned helplessness can help us understand ourselves and why we react in ways that might like be weird or incorrect under like a traumatic response. And sometimes people feel like guilty for the way that they deal with trauma and stress, and so this is kind of a way to like explore the way the brain works to try and like find like validity in like those weird feelings that you have. So the links to the books and the studies, of course, are in the description if you would like to read it, and of course like make up your own mind about it as well, and let me know if you have different conclusions in the comments too. And if you want to vent about Malcolm Gladwell, do so in the comments. Sick it to him. So in Talking to Strangers, in this book here, I actually found this at a Korean bookshop. In Korea, like there's some like bookshops that have like best-selling books that are in English, and so I picked this up, and then I looked at Malcolm Gladwell and learned that everybody hates him. But so in this study here, so the SERE program is the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape program. So this program is a program that like Navy SEALs go through, okay? And they had this map experiment, which I'll show you in the book. And so the program in itself studies like how people react in high stress situations. So these Navy SEALs, of course, like they're trained to be like the best of the best. And so when they drop them off at a park and then ask them to draw the layout of the park, and they do excellent. So if you can see there, on this side is the actual layout of the park, and on this side is a recreation of a Navy SEAL. Excellent, right? I could never freaking do that. I don't even understand how they do that. So that is what these people are capable of doing. And then part of the study, what they did is that these SEALs knew that after they drew this map, there was going to be like a mock kidnapping, and they're going to be trained how to get through torture, basically high stress situations where they like didn't have control of the situation, but they knew it would end, and for a large part of it understood that they were being trained, right? So they weren't going to like without a doubt like be in danger or anything. After that situation where people were under high stress, but they knew the stress was going to end, and they knew that in a large way that they were safe, and they knew that this was a part of training. So you would think that maybe the stress response would be lessened. However, they were asked to draw the map again of the layout, and under the stress, that is what they were able to draw after. So as you can see, a lot of their memory has been affected very negatively by trauma. And so even though they were like under physical endurance, able to endure this, their psychological resilience was still affected very greatly by the trauma. And I know like maybe this might come across as like a duh thing, and if it does, that's fair. But to me, this was really surprising because I had no idea that people even who were like trained to undergo so much stress, how their stress responses would even affect like the task at hand so heavily. So that's a huge thing that like I learned. Like I didn't know that. And not only did they have trouble like recalling the map after all of that psychological stress, but they also were tasked with like pointing out the person who performed like the test on them, like who performed the torture on these Navy SEALs, and they all picked the wrong person, which was really, really interesting because their minds were trying to legitimize the fact that they were supposed to be in a safe situation. So they all picked like the doctor on the team, but the doctor wasn't even a part of that day's experiment, which I found really, really interesting. Like trauma affects your memory in such a substantial way that you will accuse someone else who wasn't even there on the day. But it's not because they were trying to wrongly accuse someone. It was because it was their mind's way of protecting themselves. Since these people, they're not supposed to hurt me, in a controlled environment, this experiment would be conducted by a medical professional. And that's just an amazing way that the brain tries to protect you, and is just very, very surprising to me. So of course, like Gladwell's findings were to highlight how trauma affects perception of that same trauma and your memory. And even like elite people, like elite SEALs, nobody is immune to like trauma responses. And anyone under extreme stress is going to have these type of responses. Like it's not something that can be trained out of you, which obviously they were trying to do here in this experiment. Well, at least if you can be trained out of normal trauma responses, they didn't figure it out with this experiment. So in general, duh, like everybody has a difficulty dealing with these complex traumatic events, which I think is like a big comfort to know that even these highly trained, best of the best, supposedly like physically and mentally people, in the end, like they're like, there's still like biological human responses that cannot be helped under trauma, and it like can't be trained out of you. So I found like a lot of like comfort in that. So I hope like sharing that with you guys who like might not have read the book or might not have known about that. Like I hope like that in itself gives comfort and solace, because that to me was really profound. So let me know. I don't know. I'm afraid that it comes across as like stupid, right? But sometimes like when these experiments and stuff like back up these normal brain functions, there's something comforting that I find about it. And there's also like this disorientation that you see in these map drawing things where it's just like they're kind of on the right track, right? But not quite. But it kind of works as a metaphor, as like how people often fail at correctly remembering facts about the traumas that they went through, and it's your brain's way of protecting yourself. So in a way, it's kind of like a testament to be forgiving to yourself and not blame yourself for your mind and body trying to protect itself by like misremembering things or remembering things wrong. And it's also a testament on how we can treat others as well, because I think like with true crime a lot too, like people are very, very judgmental when it comes to like how people are acting under interrogation and stuff. That like, oh, that person's not crying, oh, that person's not acting the right way. But you can't predict the way that someone's feeling or acting under extreme stress and trauma. It's a way to look at people like with more compassion, and not to like look at someone and believe that you know the truth about a situation just because someone's supposed to act in one way or another. Like that's what investigations are for, to like get the actual facts of what happened, not to like make these stark judgments on people's motivations based on if they're freaked out enough or something. And basically just trauma makes people act in mysterious ways. And let me know what you guys think about that in the comments too. And this kind of like brought me to my next like point of bringing this book up too. Is there some type of reason why this happens? And again, I'm not a medical professional or anything. I'm just like a curious person who reads books. So don't take any of this as a diagnosis or anything, but this is what I learned from this book. So my question of like why people stay in contact with their toxic families, why people return to abusive relationships, why do people like return to things that hurt them despite these like proven trauma responses? Does that have to do something with like the memory in your brain protecting itself? You know, like do those two things have connections? So in this book, Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, he talks about like in the beginning of the book, talks about this experiment of learned helplessness, where in a experiment that would be very, very, very illegal today, they took a dog and put it in a cage and administered shock to it. And there was two different dogs. In one cage, the cage was open, so the dog was able to escape every time that the cage was shocking it, right? The other dog was not allowed to escape. You know, the cage was closed and it kept shocking it. And then later they did open the cage. So he was able to escape, even though the dog prior was experiencing like inescapable pain and shock. When it was given the option to leave, it didn't. So they basically used this experiment to say that when you're in a situation where it's inescapable, but then you're given a way out, you don't necessarily take it because you learn that there wasn't a way out, and you kind of get stuck in the circular motion of why would I leave? This is the pain that I've always experienced type of thing. And then a lot of people had an issue, like rightly so, like when they interpreted this experiment, they're all like, oh, well, are you saying that people are addicted to trauma? Are you saying that people who go through trauma and it's inescapable when they're given a way out, like there's no hope and people like are too dumb to escape, blah, blah, blah. And so it was like critiqued a lot, right? So at the same university with the same professors, they revisited this assignment. The original experiment was in 1967 at the University of Pennsylvania, and then they revisited this in 2017, so 50 years later. And they basically say that like these dogs trapped in these locked cages, people learn how to cope within their traumatic situations. It's not that they get addicted to this trauma. They learn to adapt to what they're trapped in, and it's what they know and it's what they understand. So like being traumatized means you're learning to organize your life around that trauma, and saying that people don't leave traumatic and harmful situations when given the chance just to say that they're like used to it, addicted to it, or like coped well enough with it is a oversimplification. So in their 2017 revisit to this experiment, they kind of hone in that the reason like why these dogs were staying was because of like this passiveness. In order to survive inescapable situations, you have to be passive about them, and you have to focus on basic survival, and you kind of have to stay in that space because of the heightened anxiety. So staying was a default reaction to prolonged events and a totally like normal one. And so since these dogs were trained to stay, they can also be a way to train them to let them know that it's safe to leave. And then this is kind of where they assert that cognitive behavioral therapy, like remapping the way that your brain thinks after trauma, can be really, really helpful. Like you get stuck in these like mind loops where you're trapped in these horrible situations, but to understand, like, and it sounds really simple, like, oh, well, there's a way out. It's really, really simple. Just take your way out. But like the reason I'm making this video is to tell anyone that comfort that it's I know it's not easy, and like the science behind it knows it's not easy, and this like cognitive behavioral therapy and like rewiring your brain to like understand that you can have hope and escape horrible situations isn't something that's like really easy. And going through that journey to try and like better yourself and like understand that you can do better for yourself is really hard. And if you're like going through that journey, I really like commend you. And that's really wonderful and beautiful. And it's hard. And that's backed up by like these experiments. So basically you can heal from trauma by training your brain that you are no longer in danger. And this can be done not only by cognitive behavioral therapy or different therapies, but also by medication too, because your literal brain acts differently under extreme stress. So like this book too, like I learned what your amygdala does. And that's like the part that like gives you warning that there's like stress or something bad's going to happen. And people who have been through a lot of bad things, that's like always on. And so like people are like always on edge. And if you need medication to like calm that down, that is warranted and like totally fine. Like something's not wrong with you because you need help because your amygdala is overactive. Like it's a physical response to real life situations. And just like in a way, like we can be like be mad at our bodies for doing that, right? But in a way, like it's a reminder to like be thankful to our bodies too, because of these responses that help us survive. And it helped us survive through whatever horrible experience. And now it's time to let your body know that there are different options and like to calm it down, you know? So like you don't have to be like mad and like punish yourself because you need help or like help rewiring the way you think. So people return to these abusive relationships, to these toxic families, think there's no way out when we say it's easy to like just leave these situations. But in their mind, it's really difficult to understand that there is hope for something different and there's hope for change. But if you see a way out, it's like not easy to leave a bad situation, but it's possible. And I think acknowledgement to you don't deserve something bad and it's possible to leave something bad is something that's really difficult to understand and think of. So if you're struggling with that, I mean, this book is excellent. So pick up this one. Maybe not this one, but this one's really, really interesting too. Just maybe like do your own reading and stuff on it and just know all the critiques of our boy Malcolm here, Mr. Gladwell. And just because someone's critiqued, like it doesn't mean that they're like a pariah, right? But just so you guys know, I don't want to like try and misinform anybody here. So one really profound thing that I found in this 50-year later experiment from Meyer and Siegelman, their revisit to their project on learned helplessness, that I'm going to read straight from their article that's also linked in the description. And it's just a beautiful way to end their article. So Meyer and Siegelman explain that hope consists largely in the habit of expecting that future bad events will not be permanent, global, and uncontrollable. Rather, they will be temporary, local, and controllable. So people stay or return to trauma because they believe it's the best option until they learn otherwise or believe in hope otherwise. So all in all, you know, there's just a lot to think about with like trauma responses and learned helplessness. It's really difficult to get into that mindset of having hope. And it's really difficult to get into that mindset of feeling like you deserve better and that it's possible. But if anything, you know, a little reminder that like you don't deserve to be hurt. If anyone needs to hear that, because I know like people who are in horrible situations, like they don't always hear that. They think like they deserve it and there's no escape, but you don't deserve it. And if you do see a way out, you deserve that way out. So I know this was kind of a heavy one. So I think if you guys decide to check out either of the books, that would just be really awesome. Even if you don't have like any trauma in your life, like maybe it'll help you look at other people's lives in a more compassionate way. And that's like what Reese Gray Analyzes is about, just a little bit adventure through stuff. And so you guys, with that, I love you very much. Okay, love you. Bye.